The judge cleared his throat like he was about to sing the national anthem, slid his glasses down the bridge of his nose, and read a number so large even the quiet bailiff muttered, "Whoa." And that was the moment my wife's smirk, calculated, glossy, camera-ready, collapsed into a confused little tremor that looked a lot like fear. But if you rewind the tape, if you step out of that Texas courtroom and back into the small, ordinary life we built before money turned into a weapon, you'll see how none of this came out of nowhere, that it started with a paper plate of ribs, a Friday night football game, and a girl who squeezed my hand like it meant a promise she planned to keep. I'm Mason, 36, born in Waco, live in a suburb north of Dallas where the HOA email blasts about trash bins like they're drafting federal law, owner of a boring, unsexy business nobody posts about on Instagram. We pick up broken vending machines, dead ice machines, old car wash vacuum motors from strip mall landlords, refurbish what we can, part out what we can't, and sell the pieces to frantic maintenance guys at bowling alleys and laundromats. It started as a side hustle during my accounting years and turned into an ugly little cash river that never makes headlines. The first time I saw her, Lena, it was at a Labor Day cookout behind a ranch house in Midlothian, the kind of backyard with a sun-faded flag on the fence, a cornhole set painted Dallas Cowboys blue, and a cooler sweating Bud Light beside a tray of deviled eggs. She had this easy, sunglasses-on-head laugh and a way of looking across a crowd like she expected something good to happen directly to her. And when she asked if the brisket was as good as everyone claimed, I said, "Only one way to find out," and handed her a plate like a nervous waiter. We were simple then, in that late 20s way. Whataburger runs after midnight, cheap Skyline tickets when the Mavericks were on a losing streak, road trips to Fredericksburg where we pretended to know things about wine. She'd tuck her feet up on the dashboard of my F-150 and sing along to 90s country like the world owed her a front row seat. I took her to my favorite diner on the edge of town, neon sign flickering, open 24 HRS, the same waitress named Patty who calls everybody honey and refills your coffee before you've decided you want it. And Lena would swipe a fry through my gravy, grin, and say, "You really gonna eat all that, Mr. Numbers?" It wasn't complicated to imagine forever with her. A small church wedding, a starter home with a too bright paint color in the kitchen, weekend trips to Home Depot where you argue about faucets and then pick the first one because you're tired. When we did get married 2 years later, at a chapel outside of Austin with big windows that made the late afternoon light look like a blessing, she cried through our vows, and my dad patted my shoulder like I'd bought the right truck. I promised her steady, the dependable kind of love that shows up for trash day and oil changes and dentist cleanings. She promised me the type of tenderness you can build a life on, and for a while we were both telling the truth. We had our rituals: Sunday morning pancakes while ESPN mumbled on the TV, Wednesday night grocery runs at H-E-B where we always forgot paper towels, Saturdays in fall watching college ball at her cousin's place, the living room full of kids and salsa bowls and a dog named Moose who hoarded socks. On our first anniversary, we couldn't afford a fancy dinner, so I grilled steaks in the rain and she held an umbrella over me and laughed when the handle slipped and water poured down my neck. There's a Polaroid of that somewhere, her face blurry with joy, me pretending to be mad. I kept my business quiet because it was easier that way. You tell people you run a parts and refurbishing operation, and they smile politely, but you tell them how the margins on coin changers are better than sin, and they glaze over. Plus, I learned early you don't brag about income streams in a city where everyone's crushing it on LinkedIn. You just let the deposits hit and pay your taxes like a grown-up. Still, there were little signs even then. Nothing you'd call trouble, just sparks that didn't fizzle right. Lena liked nice things more than I did, and where I saw a leather couch, she saw the way it photographed. Where I saw a dinner out, she saw a chance to be seen. I told myself it was youth, a stage, the Instagram fog everyone moves through before they remember what food tastes like without a picture. She picked up a group of girlfriends who worked hospitality downtown, hostess at an upscale steakhouse, assistant at a PR firm, a makeup artist popular with Dallas brides. And I didn't think much of the crowd because they were kind to me and drank tequila like it was a religion. They called her our Lena, and she glowed under it. We didn't fight about money in the obvious way. I handled the bills, she skimmed Target with a hunter's focus. We saved enough to feel safe, but sometimes, when we passed the new builds with wrought iron balconies and those absurd media rooms, she'd go quiet and say, "Can't you see us there?" and I'd deflect, make a joke about our HOA sending us to jail for leaving the trash bin visible, and she'd smile tight, a yes but kind of smile. The first real hairline crack came during a Cowboys game at her uncle's house. Lena's phone buzzed in the kitchen island, and she lifted it with her nails, reading with that quick, darting look she got at nail salons when she was pretending not to stare. When I asked if it was work, she said, too quickly, "Just Kayla picking bridesmaid dresses," and then stuck the phone in the junk drawer like it deserved time out. I told myself I was being paranoid. She'd always been private with her texts, and what did I care who was sending memes about centerpieces? But privacy became secretive in increments, small, like changing a password because your phone glitched, or stepping out onto the porch to take a call and staring at the driveway instead of the crepe myrtle like she always did. She had new inside jokes with people I hadn't met, and she laughed at nothing in the pantry with the door half shut. She stopped singing along to the radio in the truck. I remember the night I really noticed it. We were at a friend's backyard BBQ in Plano, lights strung over the fence, Spotify doing that lazy summer country shuffle, and a guy Lena knew from yoga, tall, 2 white sneakers, wristwatch the size of a cookie, touched her elbow and held it for a beat longer than a hello requires. Lena didn't step away, just let the touch sit there like a placeholder, kept her smile curated, and I felt something old-fashioned, an unflattering rise in me, the urge to say, "Hey pal, that's my wife." But instead I flipped a burger, swallowed it, and blamed the prickly feeling on sun and beer. She was different at home, too. The easy mess of our life began to tidy itself in performative ways, like she was staging our house for showings nobody scheduled. Throw pillows exactly centered, fresh eucalyptus in a tall glass, candles with names like boardroom and cashmere library. She stopped wearing my ratty college t-shirts to bed and started buying matching sets that looked like they came with an NDA. When I said, half joking, half begging, "Babe, are we okay?" she said, "We're fine, Mason. Don't make everything a thing," and kissed the air between us instead of my mouth. I felt the old accountant in me, the ledger brain, begin to tally the oddities. A lift charge at 1:40 a.m. To an address in Deep Ellum, the night she said she was crashing at Kayla's. A gas receipt tucked behind the visor of her car, even though she swore she hadn't driven out of town. The perfume that wasn't hers, a little too floral, clinging to the throw in the guest room like a rumor. I didn't become a detective overnight. I became quiet. I made coffee and listened to how the spoon hit the ceramic when she stirred. I kept mowing the yard in parallel lines and noticed the neighbor's dog barked whenever a black BMW slowed by our cul-de-sac. I upgraded our phone plan for better coverage and pretended not to know. That meant iMessage would sync to the iPad we kept for recipes. I told myself it was invasive to look, and then told myself it was protective. Somewhere in that slow pivot from us to something else, Lena began mentioning divorce the way people mention remodeling. Hypothetical at first, then priced out, then maybe next spring. She complained to friends on speakerphone in a voice meant for me to overhear. "Mason's nice, but does he want more? Does he even see me?" I wondered why more felt like a stranger in our living room. I kept my business steady and small in her eyes, because I'd learned, painfully, privately, what happens when people you love think money is a trampoline. I paid myself a modest salary through a W-2, let the LLCs stack like Tupperware in a pantry, reinvested in things nobody takes selfies with. Forklift batteries, used POS terminals, a dusty self-storage facility off Highway 67 that we picked up in a 1031 exchange. When I told Lena we were fine, she translated fine to flat, and I didn't correct her because love taught me to keep some doors closed. The night before everything broke open, we had dinner at a new steakhouse downtown where the lighting was 10% too dim and the waiters called every man boss. Lena was electric, hair glossy, nails shining like brake lights, story after story about couples we barely knew, taking trips to Cabo and Tulum and Amalfi like the world came with a frequent flyer card. She kept touching her phone under the table, as if it were a small living thing that needed reassurance. And when I asked what was so urgent, she gave me that patient smile people give to children and said, "Work is crazy," even though she hadn't worked more than 20 hours a week since July. We drove home on I-35 in our usual silence, the kind that used to be companionable and had turned into corrugated cardboard. And when we pulled into our driveway, Lena stayed in the passenger seat, staring at our porch light like it had offended her. "You ever think about how you could have been bigger?" she asked. "Like, If you weren't so quiet, I said, bigger isn't always better. And she laughed, not unkindly, but in that way that tells you your sentence is already a meme in someone's group chat. I slept badly, the way you do when you realize the house you built has a hairline crack through the slab. Sometime near dawn, I heard her in the kitchen, whispering, then the soft chime of the door code, and the brief suck of air as the door opened and closed again. And I thought, insanely, that maybe she just wanted to watch the sunrise from the porch. By the time I got downstairs, the coffee had brewed itself. Her mug sat clean and dry beside the sink, and a faint cologne that wasn't mine lingered in the hall, like a stranger had passed through, carrying a secret under his arm. I stood in the doorway to the guest room, our catch-all for laundry and gift wrap and out-of-season coats, and stared at the perfectly made bed, at the decorative pillow Lena had scolded me for mashing last week, and realized something small and very important was missing from the bottom drawer of the nightstand, something I never meant to show anyone until the day I had no other choice. The drawer in the guest room should have contained nothing more than a mess of old charging cables, some Christmas wrapping paper, and a blue folder I kept hidden under layers of junk. My quiet insurance policy. That folder held bank statements, equity papers, and a breakdown of what my business was really worth, not the boring little paycheck story I'd always given Lena. I had tucked it there years ago, back when things were good, never imagining I'd be checking on it at dawn with my heart hammering like a nail gun. Now it was gone, and all I had was the faint cologne in the air and the knowledge that my wife, who had been talking about divorce like she was floating Pinterest boards, knew more about my world than I had ever meant her to. At first, I told myself maybe I'd misplaced it. Maybe I'd taken it upstairs. Maybe it slipped under the couch cushions when I was moving stuff around. But deep down, the accountant in me knew. Folders don't walk away, not unless someone wants them. That week, Lena moved around the house differently. She was lighter, almost smug, the way a gambler acts when they're holding a royal flush and can't wait for the showdown. She'd hum in the kitchen, linger in the bathroom too long, whisper in the garage with the door cracked just enough for me to catch a shadow. The first concrete thing I found was a receipt, stuffed into the side pocket of her tote bag. 2 nights at the Fairmont Hotel in downtown Dallas, billed to her name, 1 week earlier when she claimed she was helping Kayla with wedding errands. The amount alone was enough to make me pause. Over $700 for deluxe city view. I stared at it so long my eyes blurred, then slipped it back exactly how I found it. I didn't want to tip her off, not yet. I started watching patterns. Her phone, once left on counters and nightstands, now lived face down, silent, never charging anywhere near me. I noticed she'd flinch when I walked into a room too quietly, click her screen off like she'd been burned. One night, while she showered, I sat in the living room with the iPad, syncing messages she didn't realize were flowing straight into that device. At first, it was nothing. Memes from friends, brunch plans, Instagram notifications. Then came a thread with a contact saved only as D. The tone was unmistakable. Can't wait to see you again. Last night was worth the risk. And Lena's replies, full of little hearts and emojis she hadn't used with me in months. I didn't confront her right away. That's not how I'm wired. I started a quiet investigation instead. The kind that looks like you're just mowing the lawn, but really you're mapping the puzzle. I installed a cheap GPS tracker under her SUV, the kind you can buy on Amazon with overnight shipping and a promise of discretion. Within 2 days, I had my answer. Her yoga class took place 25 miles away at an extended stay hotel off the interstate. She wasn't even subtle. But evidence is like gasoline. It's only power when you know how to ignite it. I needed more, so I pulled credit card statements. There were charges at jewelry stores she'd never mentioned to me, dinners for 2 at restaurants in Deep Ellum I'd never set foot in, Uber rides across town when she claimed to be home with a headache. It was all there in black and white, and the numbers added up to betrayal. The most chilling moment, though, came on a Wednesday night. She claimed she was meeting her friends for margaritas, kissed my cheek on the way out, and left in her new blazer like she was headed to a job interview. I sat on the couch, ESPN buzzing, waiting. An hour later, I drove to the hotel I knew she'd end up at, parked 2 rows away, and watched her step out of her car. She wasn't alone. A tall man in a pressed shirt, the same wristwatch I'd seen at that Plano BBQ, walked up, touched her waist like he'd owned it forever, and together they disappeared inside. I didn't chase, didn't cause a scene. Instead, I lifted my phone, snapped the photos, timestamp and all, and slid the device back into my pocket. The silence of that parking lot roared louder than any confrontation could. I sat there for 30 minutes, heart pounding, headlights from passing cars washing over me like spotlights, until finally I started the truck and drove home. Back in the kitchen, the house smelled faintly of her perfume lingering in the air, the way a stage smells after a play has ended. I poured a glass of water, stared at the sink, and realized the pieces fit too perfectly: the missing folder, the fake trips, the smugness. Lena thought she had mapped the game, that she'd found out about my worth, that she could walk into divorce court armed with leverage. What she didn't know was that the folder she stole was a decoy, numbers I'd doctored years ago for a separate reason, a trail meant to look real but cap out small. The real documents, the ones that told the truth about my business, my assets, my net worth, were tucked inside a safety deposit box at a regional bank 30 minutes away. And that's when suspicion became certainty. My wife wasn't just preparing to leave me, she was preparing to cash out. And as I stood in the quiet of my kitchen, ice clinking in the glass, I made a decision. I would let her think she had won, let her smirk her way into the courtroom, and then I'd watch it all come crashing down when the judge spoke the numbers out loud. The courtroom smelled faintly of old wood and paper, the kind of place where secrets didn't vanish but calcified, etched into the record forever. And as I sat there in my navy suit, polished but plain, nothing flashy, I could feel the weight of what was about to happen pressing down on my chest like a heavy ledger. Lena walked in 10 minutes late, as if she were arriving at a cocktail hour, heels clicking, hair flawless, lips curved into that smirk she'd been practicing in the bathroom mirror for weeks. She didn't look at me, not directly, just glanced once, like a predator checking to make sure its prey was still tethered. On her arm, she carried a slim leather folder, the very same one that had gone missing from our guest room drawer, and she placed it on the table in front of her attorney with a flourish, like a magician revealing the trick. I leaned back in my chair, folded my hands, and reminded myself to breathe, because this was it, the stage she thought she owned. The judge, an older man with silver hair and the dry patience of someone who's heard every excuse under the sun, called us to order. Petitioner, respondent, counsel, let's proceed. Lena's lawyer, a tall, sharp woman with red-rimmed glasses, started first, her voice smooth as she laid out the case. Irreconcilable differences, lack of fulfillment, a husband who, while decent, failed to meet his wife's evolving needs. She made me sound like a busted washing machine, serviceable once, now outdated. Lena sat there nodding, the corners of her mouth curled upward, tapping her French manicured nails on the folder. My attorney, a compact bulldog of a man named Fisher, let her finish without interruption, scribbling notes but not reacting, because the real show hadn't started yet. When it was Lena's turn to testify, she slid her chair back and walked to the stand like it was a runway. She spoke about sacrifice, about how she'd supported me while I built my little business, how she had endured years of financial uncertainty. She painted a picture of herself as a patient wife, quietly suffering, deserving of compensation now that the marriage was no longer viable. Then, with a dramatic pause, she glanced at her lawyer, who slid the leather folder across the table and handed it up as evidence. Inside, Lena said, are the financial records my husband never wanted me to see. The room tilted just slightly at that moment, like a carnival ride jerking into motion. The judge adjusted his glasses, flipped through the pages, and raised an eyebrow. He nodded once, then handed the folder back. We'll enter these into the record. Lena smirked harder, crossing her legs, chin tilted like a queen awaiting coronation. I could almost hear the soundtrack in her head. Victory horns, champagne popping. She thought she had me pinned to the mat. That was when Fisher stood. He didn't raise his voice, didn't pound the table. He just cleared his throat, walked to the lectern, and in that steady East Texas drawl of his said, Your Honor, with your permission, the respondent would like to present supplemental documentation regarding his assets. He gestured toward the bailiff, who carried a banker's box to the bench. Inside were certified statements, notarized appraisals, tax filings, and property deeds. Everything I had carefully tucked away in the safety deposit box, untouched by Lena's wandering hands. The judge flipped through them with increasing interest, his brow furrowing, his lips pursing. Then he asked, Mr. Mason, can you clarify the discrepancy here? I stood, buttoned my jacket, and spoke clearly so every ear in that room heard. Yes, Your Honor. The folder my wife submitted contains incomplete and outdated numbers, pulled from decoy files I created years ago for internal use. These documents, I gestured toward the judge's hands, reflect the true state of my business and personal assets. A hush fell over the courtroom. You could feel it, the shift, the sudden recognition that the narrative had flipped. The judge read aloud a figure, my true net worth, a number that sounded unreal in the hushed air of that paneled room. Somewhere behind me, someone muttered, "Damn," and that was the moment Lena's smirk cracked. First a flicker, just the tiniest tremor in her lip, then a tightening of her jaw, a rapid blink of her eyes as she realized she'd been holding a fake check she thought was gold. "Mrs. Mason," the judge said, his tone firm but measured, "it appears the evidence you have submitted is materially inaccurate. The respondent's financial disclosure shows assets far exceeding what's in your file. Can you explain this discrepancy?" Lena's mouth opened, closed, then opened again, like a fish gasping on dry land. She stammered something about not knowing, about finding the papers, about assuming they were real. Her lawyer shifted uncomfortably, clearly blindsided. The judge's gavel hit the block once, sharp. "Enough. The court does not look kindly on misrepresentation." Fisher seized the moment. "Your Honor, my client has complied fully and honestly with all financial disclosure requirements. He has no objection to equitable distribution, but we ask the court to recognize the petitioner's bad faith in presenting falsified or incomplete documents." His words cut clean, no theatrics needed. That's when Lena snapped. "He lied to me," she shouted, her voice cracking through the courtroom. "He hid everything all these years, made me live like I was married to some small-time repairman while he was sitting on a fortune." She pointed at me, her face red, mascara trembling at the edges. The room buzzed with murmurs. The judge raised a hand. "Control yourself, Mrs. Mason." I didn't move, didn't flinch. I just looked at her, steady, calm, and said quietly enough that only those in the front rows could hear, "No, Lena, I didn't lie. I protected myself." It wasn't rage, wasn't triumph, it was simple truth. And in that truth, her whole performance collapsed. The humiliation was complete when the judge addressed the record. Given the evidence presented today, this court will proceed with equitable division based on the respondent's verified assets. However, the petitioner's attempt to introduce misleading documents will be considered in determining credibility and future claims. Translation: she had burned her own case to the ground. Lena sat down hard, the smirk gone, her face pale, lips pressed into a bloodless line. She looked around the courtroom, as if hoping someone, anyone, would come to her rescue, validate her performance. But no one did. The bailiff adjusted his belt, Fisher scribbled another note, and the judge moved on to the next item of business like her meltdown was just another Tuesday. And in that moment, as the sound of the gavel echoed again, I realized we had crossed the line where there was no going back. Lena wasn't just my wife anymore. She was my opponent, exposed and cornered in front of everyone. The cliffhanger wasn't the numbers themselves. It was the silence afterward, heavy and sharp. The kind of silence that says, this isn't over, but when the next blow lands, it won't be private. It'll be public, final, and impossible to undo. When the gavel came down for the final time, the sound didn't feel like an ending so much as a release, like air rushing out of a balloon you've been gripping for too long. And as people shuffled out of the Dallas County courtroom, heels clacking, briefcases snapping shut, whispers spilling like radio static, I stayed seated for a moment, watching Lena gather her things with trembling hands that once slipped into mine so easily. She didn't look at me, not this time. The smirk had long since died on her lips, replaced by something I couldn't name. Rage, maybe, or shame, or just the hollow recognition that she had played her hand too soon and lost the table. Her lawyer whispered urgently, but Lena just shook her head, shoved the useless folder back into her bag, and marched out with her chin held high, but her shoulders betraying the weight of it all. I let her go without a word. Some wars end not with a bang, but with silence that burns hotter than any shout. The decree itself was clinical, just lines on paper. Equitable distribution, yes, but no windfall for her. Credibility dinged, yes, which meant that future claims would be harder to press. Visitation if kids had been in the mix, thank God they weren't, and a clean break otherwise. It looked cold on the page, but to me it was liberation disguised as legal jargon. Walking out into the Texas sun, I felt lighter than I had in years, like the concrete beneath my boots wasn't pulling me down anymore. The first few weeks after were messy in the way endings always are. I came home to a house stripped of her touches. Half the photos gone from the walls, her perfume no longer clouding the bathroom, the bed suddenly too big. The refrigerator was emptier than I liked. The mail still came with her name on some envelopes, and Moose, the neighbor's dog, kept sniffing around our porch like he expected to see her. I'd wake up at 2 a.m., sometimes disoriented, reaching for a body that wasn't there, and then remember with a jolt of relief, she was gone, and that was good. Healing doesn't announce itself with trumpets. It creeps in through small mercies, like the first Saturday morning I made pancakes just for myself, flipping them while ESPN rambled in the background, and realized I didn't need her laugh to make the syrup taste sweet. Money wasn't the point, though money had been her obsession. I wasn't suddenly free because I was rich. I'd been free the moment I chose peace over performance. But the money did give me room to breathe. I bought myself a new grill, stainless steel, big enough to smoke 3 racks of ribs at once, and invited my brother over for a cookout. We sat on the porch with Bud Light sweating in the heat, the Cowboys preseason game humming on the radio, and he said, "Man, you look 10 years younger." I laughed for real, not the hollow kind I'd gotten used to with Lena, but the belly-deep kind that leaves your chest sore. There were darker moments, too. Seeing her out in town once, 2 months later, at a Target in Arlington, her cart piled with throw pillows and candles, her face drawn tight when she spotted me. She looked at me like I was a ghost, like I carried her failure in my eyes. I nodded politely, kept moving, and that was enough. Revenge isn't always fireworks. Sometimes it's just walking past the wreckage without stopping to sift through the ashes. I started filling my evenings with things that felt like me again. Reading on the porch until the mosquitoes got bold, tinkering in the garage with a busted jukebox I'd hauled home from a laundromat, jogging around the neighborhood before dawn while sprinklers hissed across manicured lawns. Neighbors waved differently, more sincerely now that Lena wasn't curating our image with her smirk and perfect nails. One even dropped by with a 6-pack saying, "Heard what happened, man. Glad you came out on top." I didn't gloat. I just clinked cans and said, "Sometimes the trash takes itself out." The healing wasn't about Lena losing. It was about me choosing. Choosing quiet mornings with coffee steaming in a chipped mug instead of tense silences over perfectly staged lattes. Choosing nights of ESPN highlights over evenings spent watching her scroll through Instagram, comparing our life to strangers. Choosing the reality of who I was, a man who built something unglamorous but solid, a man who knew the worth of steady hands and honest work, over the image she wanted to project. In time, I even forgave her, in a private way. Not because she deserved it, but because carrying her betrayal like a stone in my chest wasn't worth the weight. Forgiveness isn't about excusing someone. It's about refusing to let their poison circulate in your blood. I let it drain out, slow but steady, until all that was left was memory. One night, months later, I sat on the porch again, grill cooling, beer half drunk, the cicadas buzzing their endless hymn, and I thought about the trial, about the moment the judge read my net worth aloud. Lena's smirk, the collapse, the silence. It had felt like vindication then, but what I remembered most now wasn't her face. It was the peace that followed, the calm, the way my shoulders finally stopped carrying weight they were never built to bear. Life isn't perfect now, it's just mine again. And that's more than enough, because in the end, sometimes the most American kind of justice isn't the courtroom drama or the public humiliation. It's the simple act of sitting in your own home, with your own life back, flipping pancakes on a Sunday morning and realizing the storm has passed. Sometimes the trash really does take itself out.